Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 on Thursday, the 29th of June. My name is Brian Liddy and I'm joined this evening by a regular guest, William Duguid. William, welcome
Hi.
to the show again. How are you?
Fine. It's a bonus appearance for me as I was on Tuesday as well. Good to
Well,
see you though. How are you?
I'm holding together, as they say. And William, I should say that you're a writer and an activist with Perth and Kinross Yes Hub. So
That's right.
thank you very much for joining us. So I'll go on to our first routine regular update of the Ukraine war, day 491. Ukrainian forces are advancing slowly but surely on the front lines in the east and southeast of the country, as well as around the long-standing flashpoint of Bakhmut, senior military officials have said. Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief General Valery Zaluzhny told Chairman of the US Joint Chiefs of Staff Mark Milley that his forces had succeeded in seizing the strategic initiative. Speaking on national television, Ukrainian Deputy Defence Minister Hanna Maliar said forces had made advances in sectors in the south designated by two occupied towns, Berdyansk and Mariupol. The death toll in a Russian rocket attack on a packed pizza restaurant in the eastern Ukrainian city of Kramatorsk has risen to 12, including 4 children. Ukraine's State Emergency Service said at least 56 people were injured, some critically, when 2 Iskander missiles slammed into the restaurant in the city centre on Tuesday evening. Ukraine's SBU intelligence agency has arrested a local employee of the gas transportation company, accusing him of helping the Russians carry out the attack on Kramatorsk by coordinating the strike and sending video footage of the cafe to the Russian military. Russian President Vladimir Putin has said that he didn't doubt that he had the support of Russians during the mutiny. Russian state television showed Putin making a rare public walkabout in Derbent, including shaking hands with people. Russian General Sergei Surovikin, who is reported to have had prior knowledge of the Wagner uprising and previously led the invasion force in Ukraine, has not been seen in public since Saturday. The distribution of humanitarian aid in Nevsky, in the Ukraine-controlled portion of Luhansk, has been paused after Russian shelling. The Russian-imposed acting governor of occupied Kherson region has denied claims that Ukrainian troops have established a bridgehead over the Dnipro at the Antonivsky Bridge. Poland expects the EU to help it fund measures to strengthen its eastern border, a deputy minister said today, due to concerns over the presence of Wagner Group troops in Belarus. The Hungarian Parliament's House Committee has rejected a proposal to schedule a vote on the ratification of Sweden's NATO membership for next week. The EU should not lower the bar on membership for Ukraine in terms of corruption and democracy, Denmark's foreign minister has warned in an interview with the Financial Times. Russia said it is opening criminal cases against what it claims are 160 mercenaries from 33 different countries who are operating on behalf of Ukrainian forces in the country. US President Joe Biden said Putin was clearly losing the war, but that it was too early to tell whether he had been weakened by the Wagner rebellion. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said the failed mutiny had weakened Putin, but the implications for his invasion of Ukraine remained unclear. So that's our Ukraine update. William, was there anything in there that caught your eye this evening?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, I haven't commented yet on the attack on the pizza restaurant, which was horrific and a war crime in anybody's book. Russia is claiming that it killed a couple of generals, I understand, and some officers, but to be quite honest, it's very clearly a civilian target. I know this happens in wartime, but we need to call it out when it happens, and it really is not acceptable. Um, the other thing, the story of the mutiny continues to play out with Surovkin apparently having knowledge prior to the uprising, or even if it was a mutiny, we don't know. But anyway, to have prior knowledge of it, and I think the Guardian is now reporting that he's been detained just in the last few minutes. So that story, I think, may be continuing to unfold, but it's not entirely clear what's going on. As everything, it's just a fog of war, and you get these stories. I tend to agree now with Biden that there's clear signs that Putin is beginning to lose the war, but I also agree with Biden in that he may not be particularly weakened by what's gone on in the last week.
Thank you, William. Yeah, it is fascinating, I must admit, this Wagner. As you said, we don't really know what to call it yet. So I'll move on to our first item of this evening. Court of Appeal judges have ruled that it is unlawful to send asylum seekers to Rwanda to have their claims processed, in a judgment that delivers a potential hammer blow to government policy. Rishi Sunak said in a statement that the government would now seek permission to appeal against the decision at the Supreme Court, as he insisted that Rwanda was a safe country and said that the court had agreed with this. The ruling follows a 4-day hearing in April against a High Court decision last December that it was lawful to send some asylum seekers, including people arriving on small boats, to Rwanda to have their claims processed, rather than dealing with their applications for sanctuary in the UK. The court ruled that due to deficiencies in the Rwandan asylum system, there was a real risk that people sent to Rwanda would be returned to their home countries, where they face persecution on other inhumane treatment, when in fact they had a good claim for asylum. The court's conclusion was that Rwanda was not a safe third country, even though assurances provided by the Rwandan government were provided in good faith. Home Secretary Suella Braverman said she was disappointed by the ruling, adding, "The British people want to stop the boats, and so does this government. That's what I am determined to deliver, and I won't take a backward step from that." The court heard from the UNHCR that Rwanda had a record of human rights abuses towards refugees within its borders, including refoulement, that's forced removal to countries where they are at risk, expulsions and arbitrary detention. The refugee agency said the Home Office would not be able to guarantee the safety of asylum seekers who were deported to the East African country. The SNP's Home Affairs spokesperson, Alison Thulis MP, said, "The Tory government's Rwanda policy should be scrapped. It is inhumane, unlawful, unworkable, and a waste of public money. The Tories and Labour are locked in a toxic race to the bottom on migration that stands contrary to the compassionate approach that people in Scotland want to see." So, William, I can't help thinking when I hear about this item I'm reminded of Suella Braverman's dream that she was going to see an aeroplane full of asylum seekers take off for Rwanda. She was practically ecstatic, if you could see the expression on her face. So do you think, is her dream closer to reality today or further away?
Well, it's probably further away, but this will be appealed and it will probably go to the Supreme Court. One thing I think that's disappointing about the Court of Appeal's ruling is that it doesn't say that the overall policy is unlawful. It merely, I think, focuses on Rwanda as not a safe location on the basis that history shows that there is a record of refoulement. Therefore, the Home Office cannot rely on the undertakings that it will be treated as a safe location by Rwanda. They will insist that they can, but in reality, they can't. And so it doesn't stop the UK from deciding on another third country as the place to dump its refugees. And if that country, according to the Court of Appeal, were not thought to be an unsafe country, then that would be perfectly fine. And I don't think that's perfectly fine. I think that's a shocking and morally repugnant way to run your asylum process. And quite clearly, if you want to stop small boats, which I do agree with because they are extremely dangerous and a magnet for human traffickers. But if you want to stop them, the way to do it is to have a proper, humane, and integrated with other countries asylum policy, and to really put the resources into the asylum system to ensure that you can run it. And that's the only humane and proper way to treat asylum seekers who, let's face it, have gone through a hell of a time already just getting to the stage where they're claiming asylum. And there is absolutely no value in traumatizing them further by punting them onto a plane to any third country. So I don't think we're any closer to the policy being dumped. We're no closer to the illegal migration bill being dumped. I wish these things would happen and the government would think again. I do think that Scotland has got a much better attitude to the whole question of asylum seeking. And, well, we'll just have to wait and see what the next step is. I think it will be that Supreme Court referral.
Thank you, William. And you mentioned having a system where the UK would work in an integrated system with other countries. Remind me, but the UK had that, didn't they, when they were part of the EU? They had the Dublin Convention, which was part of the Geneva Convention, and which said the EU member states had the power or had the right to send asylum seekers back to the first country within the EU that they arrived in. And now, since Brexit, we're out of the EU and we no longer have that power. Is that right?
Welcome to taking back control. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the UK, through Brexit, has made life more difficult for itself on a number of fronts, and this is just one of them. And I really don't think that the people currently making the decisions have the caliber to get themselves out of these situations and to enact some proper ways of dealing with folk who are essentially traumatized and need our help.
Thank you, William. And of course, I'm sure we'll be covering the fact that it is going to go to the Supreme Court by the sounds of what Mr. Sunak was saying. And then if they reject it, people are talking, some Conservative politicians are talking about the UK leaving the European Court for Human Rights, but we'll leave that for when it materialises down the line.
That will be a juicy one for sure, yeah.
Yes, but time is against us, so moving on. Plans to deliver increased protection for Scotland's marine environment will be revised with a new pathway and timetable, Net Zero Secretary Mary McCallan has confirmed. Addressing the Scottish Parliament, the Cabinet Secretary said proposals consulted on implementing the highly protected marine areas, the HPMAs, across 10% of Scotland's seas by 2026 will not be progressed. Instead, the Scottish Government will take more time to work with industry, communities and conservation organisations to enhance marine protection, while supporting any groups that wish to pursue community-led marine protection in their local area on a quicker timescale, such as those initiatives in Lamlash Bay on Arran and St Abbs and Eyemouth in Berwickshire. It follows a public consultation which ran earlier in the year on the principles of HPMA policy in Scotland and attracted thousands of responses. Ms McCallan said, "We chose to consult as early and widely as possible on the principles of HPMAs with no predetermined sites. It has always been and continues to be this government's plan to work cooperatively with communities to identify how and where to enhance marine protection in a way that minimises impact and maximises opportunity. Therefore, while we remain firmly committed to the outcome of enhanced marine protection, the proposals as consulted on will not be progressed. I will outline more on our next steps after the summer recess, but I hope that it is clear that I am determined to protect our oceans in a way that is fair and to find a way forward that ensures our seas remain a source of prosperity for the nation, especially in our remote coastal and island communities." So, William, and for this item, I'm reminded that Ross, at recent FMQs, the First Minister Humza Yousaf answered a question, which I think it was from Douglas Ross. The question said that the Tory Scottish Conservative leader said that the plans for the HPMAs risked thousands of jobs. The First Minister went on and confirmed that such zones will not be implemented in communities that don't want them. So I've lost track of my question. I think the First Minister also pointed out that the Scottish Conservative Party in their manifesto actually supported HPMAs. Again, maybe you can help straighten out my rather befuddled attempt at trying to get a question to you.
From my encyclopedic knowledge of HPMAs, I mean, this is not restricted to Scotland or to the UK. I mean, this is part of a biodiversity strategy which is across many countries. The EU biodiversity strategy, for what it's worth, is, I believe, that by 2030, at least 30% of the EU seas should be protected. That's to say, marine protection areas, and 10% of them strictly protected, which would be the HPMA that we're talking about here. Um, Now, I think the lesson of Lamlash Bay and St Abbs and Eyemouth is that the community-led way of doing things is the best, and certainly it's vital that communities should buy into and therefore get the chance to work on how they're implemented the creation of new marine protected areas. And so I actually welcome this stepping back, if it is a stepping back, because I think it is probably based on the consultation that the government actually carried out. And the government does lots of consultations. And to be quite frank with you, one gets a bit cynical, or one has been getting a bit cynical about how many of the findings are actually finding their way into what the government does. But I sense a slight change in direction and a change in the wind, perhaps since Humza Yousaf became First Minister, which I think is very welcome, because I do think that this particular move is based on the results of the consultation. And I see the pragmatism behind it also in terms of really avoiding getting into all sorts of legislative tangles that are unnecessary and just taking a wee bit more time to think about things. The deposit return scheme, you could argue, is another case where this has happened. So if we're seeing increased pragmatism from the Scottish Government and increased genuine consultation with communities about how things should happen, then I think that's very welcome. And in the meantime, let's just continue to take soundings and to see what other communities are interested in doing something here.
Thank you. And of course, Fergus Ewing famously tore up a copy of the report in Holyrood, didn't he, in a Holyrood debate? So it'd be interesting to find out how he's feeling, or if he thinks it's a good thing today. But anyway, as I said, time is against us, so I'll move on to the next item, if that's okay, William.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Former cabinet ministers and allies of Boris Johnson have been accused of launching an unprecedented and coordinated campaign to undermine the inquiry into whether he misled Parliament over Partygate. The finding came in a new report by the Privileges Committee, which posed a fresh problem for Rishi Sunak, as it recommended toughening up the rules on interference in such inquiries and condemned behaviour of former ministers. 7 Tory MPs and 3 peers, including a serving government minister, were named and told their behaviour risked discrediting the fundamental aim of the system of checks and balances in Parliament. The former Cabinet Minister Nadine Dorries, Priti Patel and Jacob Rees-Mogg were named, as were other former frontbenchers Brendan Clark-Smith, Mark Jenkinson, Andrea Jenkins and Michael Fabricant. Zach Goldsmith, a Foreign Office Minister, and 2 other Tory peers, Lord Cruddas and Lord Greenhalgh, were similarly criticised. Earlier this month, the Privileges Committee said it would write a special report on the issues it encountered during its 14-month inquiry into Johnson's Partygate denials. In its ruling, the committee found he had committed 5 contempts of Parliament. Its follow-up report, published on Thursday, today, said some senior Tories had waged a campaign across newspapers, radio and social media to discredit the committee's work and the 7 MPs that serve on the cross-party group. They all tried to undermine procedures of the House of Commons, and 2 MPs in particular, Dorries and Rees-Mogg, were said to have mounted the most vociferous attacks from the platform of their own hosted TV shows on Talk TV and GB News, respectively. The 4 Tory members of the committee were particularly targeted, the committee said. It noted this had the clear intention to drive those members of the committee and so to frustrate the intention of the House that the inquiry should be carried out, or to prevent the inquiry coming to a conclusion, which the critics did not want. Thangam Debonair, the shadow leader of the Commons, told Sky News on Thursday that Privileges Committee members had been put under intolerable pressure from atrocious comments by fellow MPs. Examples of such behaviour cited by the Privileges Committee included a tweet from Dorries calling it a kangaroo court that had changed the rules to suit its own narrative, and Rhys Mogg, who said it makes kangaroo courts look respectable and was a political committee against Boris Johnson. So, William, a lot to get our teeth into here. When I'm reading this item, I'm first reminded of Rishi Sunak's words when before he stepped into number 10 for the first time, when he said he was going to bring back professionalism, integrity and accountability. Is there any sign of those three qualities today, do you think?
Well, this is a problem for Rishi Sunak in that I think he needs to deal with the outcome of this report today. It was a fairly intolerable pressure, and if you believe, as the UK Parliament is sovereign, I mean, I think I know the people of Scotland are sovereign here, but the UK Parliament regards itself as sovereign. You just cannot go against its procedures in this way, using the foghorn of your TV shows, be they on Talk TV or GB News or whatever has popped up this week. It's ridiculous to attack the whole committee and claim it to be a kangaroo court against Boris Johnson when, after all, more than 50% of that committee were Tory MPs. So I think action needs to be taken. I think also there need to be perhaps thoughts about a change in the rules so that this sort of pressure cannot be levied against members of committees who are trying to do their jobs and are trying really to maintain the discipline of the House of Commons. You asked about professionalism. I think there has been a lot of unprofessionalism, certainly in the last few months, really through the latter part of the Johnson prime ministership and through the Liz Truss era. And Rishi Sunak may have thought it was going to get better. He may have declared it was going to get better. But the current signs are that there's too much wild behaviour going on that really needs to be curbed in the name of freedom of speech. Well, freedom of speech, as we know, has got to be limited in some places. And in other circumstances, this would be tantamount to a contempt of court. And I think it should be probably treated as such. And it'll be very interesting to see what happens next.
Thank you, William. And I had a wee look just before we came on air, and it seems that despite the findings of this new additional report from the committee, they're still at it. So Nadine Dorries, on an interview with Talk TV, rejected criticism from the Privileges Committee, and she said, first of all, they need to grow up and put on their big girl and big boy pants and stop crying about hurty words. This is a democracy we live in where free speech reigns. If they don't want to be accused of being a kangaroo court, they should stop hopping about so much. So it looks as if the report isn't really going to have any effect on their behaviour.
It's not going to have any effect on them unless somebody makes it. You just try standing up in a court of law and saying that to the judge and see how far you get. Honestly, words fail me.
Okay, so I'll take that opportunity then to move on to the next item. The SNP has said that the growing crisis over Thames Water has shown Scotland was right to keep water in public hands. It comes amid growing fears other water companies could join Thames Water in crisis. In December, industry regulator Ofwat warned it had concerns about the resilience of several other water suppliers. Meanwhile, leaked documents suggested, apologies for the pun there, meanwhile leaked documents suggest privatised water companies could impose price rises of up to 40% on consumers by the end of the decade. Water was privatised in England and Wales by Margaret Thatcher through the 1989 Water Act. Between 1991 and 2021, water companies paid out £50.6 billion in dividends to shareholders. Despite this, Shadow Energy Secretary Ed Miliband has repeated the Labour Party's opposition to following Scotland's lead and taking water into public ownership. In contrast, Scotland's public drinking water and sewage services are provided by Scottish Water, a public company accountable to Scottish Government ministers, and the Scottish Parliament is committed to keeping water in public hands. Commenting, SNP Energy spokesperson Alan Brown MP said, "The growing crisis over Thames Water has shown that Scotland was right to keep water in public hands, and it will always stay that way under the SNP." Will the pro-Brexit Labour Party joining the Tories in opposing public ownership of water? The SNP is the only party offering real change with independence and the only party that can be trusted to ensure key services stay in public hands, where they belong. He continued, "It's a scandal that the Westminster parties privatised water in England and Wales, and it beggars belief that Keir Starmer has now adopted the same position as Margaret Thatcher by opposing public ownership of water. The Tories and Labour Party have allowed shareholders to take billions in profit, which should be used to improve infrastructure and reduce bills." So, William, it seems to me that Brexit's implicated here again. Nope, that's the previous item, Thames Water. When Thatcher,
Brexit's always implicated somehow.
it's definitely always in the mix, isn't it? So when Thatcher privatised the water industry, the companies at that time, they had no debt. I don't know if that's been widely reported at the moment, but do you think, is that significant or not when we're talking about 50 odd billion pounds being taken out of Thames Water?
I think it could be, but I mean the main thing is that this is a completely unnatural way to run your water supply. Apart from England and Wales, almost nobody else does this. I think Chile does it, and it's been a disaster there as well. In every other country, including I think most states of the US, water is a public utility owned publicly and run publicly, and therefore you don't have the middlemen, you don't have shareholders taking big dividends out of it, you don't have foreign investors making money out of it. You have a public service that is for the people and spends appropriately to maintain itself. One of the big issues with particularly Thames Water, but I think many of the English and Welsh water companies, is that they have a terrible problem with leakage because they have not maintained their infrastructure, because that's not the smart thing to do if you're a shareholder operation. So Alan Brown is quite right to say that Scotland was right to keep its water public. But I have to say, it was a fairly close run thing, because the Thatcher government, actually it would have been the major government perhaps latterly, that had plans to privatise Scottish Water just the same, and was going to hive it off to 3 separate water companies before turning it private. And it was only changed by a referendum in Strathclyde in 1994, which had a 70% turnout and 97% in favour of not changing from a public water supply. And lo and behold, the people triumphed, and the plans were dropped. And the 3 water companies that had been created were sort of scrunched into Scottish Water in 2002, and water has remained in public hands in Scotland ever since. But it was a close shave, as we can now see. And it's just astonishing that Labour do not want to think in terms of public ownership, because it's the way to go with that and many, many other vital public utilities. And the sooner the UK realises that, the better.
Yeah, thank you for that excellent summary, William. We'd better move on to the next item. But before I do move on, I mean, apart from just the amount of money that's been lost and the huge amount of debt with Thames Water, there's also that issue of human effluence that the English companies are having to deal with as well. So they're not even getting a decent service or quality for their money. But I suppose I'd better move on before I get into trouble. Labour's Shadow Work and Pensions spokesperson told the Daily Record that he is not proposing more devolution of the benefit system, despite former Labour Party leader Gordon Brown's promises ahead of the 2014 referendum. Mr Brown promised that Scotland was going to be as close to a federal state as you can be in the UK within a year or two, but it was never fulfilled by the Smith Commission. Labour representatives on the Smith Commission blocked SNP proposals for greater devolution of social security then, and it seems that the UK Labour Party's position remains unchanged, despite Gordon Brown's latest proposals for UK constitutional change. The move is the latest in a long line of U-turns, which has seen the Labour Party back Brexit and break its pledges on rent controls, tuition fees, free school meals, public sector pay, public ownership of key services, freedom of movement, progressive taxation, electoral reform of the House of Lords, and Scotland's right to choose its own future. Commenting, SNP social justice spokesperson David Linden MP said, "It's clear the pro-Brexit Labour Party can't be trusted to defend and extend devolution. Keir Starmer has broken so many promises it's hard to believe a word he says. In 2014, the Labour Party promised Scotland would have maximum devolution and near federalism within 2 years, but they're still breaking their promises almost a decade on." He continued, "The SNP is the only party fighting Scotland's corner and offering real change with independence. It's the only way to escape Westminster's control and ensure Scotland has the full powers we need to build a stronger, fairer and more prosperous society." The SNP government has led the way with progressive policies like the Scottish Child Payment and the Best Start grant, lifting 90,000 children out of poverty. The Tory-like Labour Party tried to block Scotland getting these powers, and now they want to stop further progress. People want change, but Sunak and Starmer are just offering Brexit, cuts and the same damaging policies that got the UK into this mess. So, William, this reminds me of Jeremy Corbyn's last manifesto, which I think was before the general election in 2019. I was living in England at the time, and I remember a lot of people were saying they thought it was a great manifesto. But when I looked at it, it sounded to me like an SNP manifesto. So do you think this shows how far Labour has gone then from its original positions on the left?
Well, to an extent, it possibly does. Certainly, it's travelled considerably from the left in recent years. The Jeremy Corbyn experiment was not a comfortable one for the party hierarchy, although I think it was probably likely to be more popular with voters than what they're likely to be getting now. It's the idea that Labour will just come and fix you, just stay there till we come and fix you. That's basically what it's all about. We'll deal with Social Security Scotland. It's all fine. You won't have anything else to do about it. When in fact the Scottish government in the areas of Social Security that have been devolved to them have actually made some very, very innovative moves. 7 new benefit payments that don't exist anywhere else, and that includes the Scottish Child Payment that you mentioned, which has been, in my view, an outstanding success in just raising people far enough to stave off a wee bit poverty and to make Scotland one of the places in the UK which does not have as significant a level of child poverty as the UK average. So I think Jonathan Ashwood was slagging off Scotland's Social Security Day today while campaigning in Rutherglen, and I wouldn't be doing too much campaigning on that, because I think a lot of people will have benefited from these changes and will recognise that things are potentially better and that perhaps more devolution, hey, maybe even getting the whole thing to deal with, would be a good thing. I don't really hold out any hope, though, for any of that coming if Keir Starmer is voted in as Prime Minister at the next election. I think this idea that he will fix things generally, or that he'll be a better bet for Scottish independence, certainly isn't going to be borne out.
Thank you, William. And time really is against us. We're definitely a bit behind time, but I can't resist finding out your opinion on this briefly, if you can. Do you think this means that despite what Labour might tell Scotland, that they finally realised that they don't need Scotland? So what they're doing is they're saying, and they're just saying what they want to us without fear of any kind of retribution?
Well, Labour may not need us electorally. Electorally the maths don't stack up. England needs Scotland. England needs Scotland to basically provide it with power and water and probably other things over the next few years. And if you take Scotland out of England, that's going to be a problem for England. I didn't get that the right way around, but you know what I mean. Scotland isn't part of England now. But they need us more than we need them. That's what it boils down to.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, we get you fine. So I'll move on to the next item. A Paris court has found a former Rwandan military policeman guilty of genocide and crimes against humanity during the 1994 slaughter in his home country and sentenced him to life in prison. The court found Philippe Hatigekimana, who was 66 years old, guilty of nearly all of the charges against him. He fled to France after the genocide, obtaining refugee status and then the French nationality under the name Philippe Manier. The trial of Hati Gekimana, which began last month, was the fifth such trial in France of an alleged participant in the massacres. More than 800,000 people were killed between April and July 1994, according to UN figures, most of them from the Tutsi minority. Hati Gekimana was charged with involvement in the murder of dozens of Tutsis and also setting up roadblocks to stop Tutsis who would then be killed in and around the southern provincial capital of Nyanza, where he worked as a senior police official. Plaintiffs accused him of using the powers and military force conferred to him through his rank in order to take part in the genocide. He was also accused of being involved in the murders of a nun and the mayor of the town of Nitazo, who opposed the killings, of having a role in the killing of 300 Tutsi refugees on a hill called Nyamugari and an attack in which about 1,000 civilians died. He fled France for Cameroon in late 2017, and the press reported that the Collective of Civil Parties for Rwanda, one of the plaintiffs in this week's trial, had filed a complaint against him. He was arrested in the capital, Yaoundé, in 2018 and extradited to France. He denied the charges. Several fugitives from the Rwandan massacres who travelled to France have found themselves in the French courts. France has tried and convicted a former spy chief, 2 ex-mayors, a former hotel chauffeur and an ex-top official in similar trials since 2014, although it generally refuses requests to extradite suspects to Paul Kagame's Rwandan regime. So, William, this is an item that I knew very little about before this evening. It seems that France is one of the top destinations for fugitives from the Rwandan massacres. What do you think of this item?
Well, I think, I think the wheels of justice grind exceedingly slowly because it's 29 years since these events took place. But as long as they keep getting there, that's probably a good thing. No particular comment on the circumstances of the case. I mean, war crimes and genocide crimes are just terrible things, and I'm glad to see finally there is a result. The one thing that you said at the very end is perhaps significant, is that France will not extradite these folk to Rwanda to face justice there. I wonder what that says about Rwanda as a place where you can expect things to be done properly, and maybe that reflects a wee bit on our own legal migration bill that we spoke about earlier.
To admit, I kept on thinking about the word Rwanda cropping up in other news stories tonight, and if there might be some kind of connection or influence to be drawn there. So thank you. But I'll move on to the next item. Figures released by the Office for National Statistics, the ONS, show Scotland's trading performance as the strongest of the UK nations. The experimental statistics provide estimates of the value of international imports and exports and total trade from 2016 to 2021 from each area of the UK. They show that in 2021, Scotland had the highest trade surplus at £20.9 billion of all the 4 UK nations and the UK as a whole. The estimated value of Scotland's trade surplus in 2021 was at its highest point in the 5 years measured. Commenting on the findings, Trade Minister Richard Lochhead said, forgive me, that quote is missing there. The ONS statistics paint a very positive picture of Scotland's trade performance over this period. These figures, while experimental, I think this is the missing quote, forgive me. These figures, while experimental and open to revision, are testament to the resilience and quality of Scottish businesses and highlight the support of our export growth plan, which was launched in 2019 with the goal of increasing the value of exports from 25% of Scotland's GDP. Exports boost the economy, drive growth and create jobs. They are a key element of our national strategy for economic transformation, and we continue to develop Scotland's world-class expertise in areas such as life sciences, digitech and food and drink through initiatives such as the Scottish Government's recently launched innovation strategy. So, William, I'm tempted to ask, where do you think Brexit is in this story? Must be in there somewhere.
Well, Scotland has achieved those figures up to 2021 despite Brexit, not because of Brexit, I think, but probably despite it, with all the disadvantages, particularly to sectors of the economy in which Scotland tended to specialise. So that's something to be applauded. Um, it also says something, certainly for the second half of the 5-year span, uh, about the growth plan, the export growth plan. That is clearly working fairly well. The other interesting thing is that things had reached a high in terms of trade surplus in 2021 when the economy was still recovering from the initial onset of COVID. So that's something to bear in mind as well. And it shows that there is a guiding intelligence going on in building the Scottish economy up. I know it's baby steps because it only can be, but it does give a big message to the naysayers that basically tell us we're useless, and to the likes of Reporting Scotland, who would never even tell you there was an export growth plan. And it certainly says something about how we would get on if we became independent. Those that think we might be a basket case are sorely misconceiving the whole situation. It's clear that we've got the expertise and the innovation to be able to survive and indeed thrive. And that's a good thing to hear. So this is a good news story today.
Thank you, William. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are. I mean, I've read out quite a few stories that have a similar feel to this in the time that I've been working here at Broadcast in Scotland. This isn't the first time we've read out this kind of these good, positive figures for Scotland in terms of the economy and growth. Do you think perhaps that these kinds of stories or these kinds of figures, these kinds of reports might be the reason why support for independence rarely gets above 50%, because people think, well, actually, we're doing quite well despite things like COVID and Brexit?
I don't think so. I think it's because people don't hear enough of the stories. I think we find at the Hub, if I may just name check them, Scotland the Brief by Believe in Scotland, which gives you the figures about the Scottish economy and has been updated to 2023, fully reflecting Brexit. That is one of the major drivers of people to start thinking seriously about independence when they hadn't previously. And it's because you're actually putting the figures in front of them. And the book is just full of them, and they're very well presented as well. And that does change minds. So if we get the positive story out, then the dial moves on independence. And the interests of our opponents are in those figures not getting out and those stories remaining untold.
Thank you, William. Yeah, we had Gordon McIntyre Kemp on the full Scottish here in Broadcasting Scotland on Sunday, so if any viewers missed that, then I'd say you should take a look at that. And another good source I would say is Professor Robertson's Talking Up Scotland too. And Professor John Robertson, he's also a frequent guest here on the show, so if he's listening in tonight, then just say hello and thank you for all the work that you do. So I'll move on to the next item. A £17.5 million funding package will be delivered this year to help establish Scotland as one of Europe's leading start-up economies. In a statement to Parliament, Wellbeing Economy and Fair Work Secretary Neil Gray set out a range of actions and investments this year to support entrepreneurs and set up businesses, which are worth nearly £1 billion to the Scottish economy. He also announced that the Scottish Government will take forward the recommendations of the Pathways report on supporting women in entrepreneurship. These include developing pre-start centres and pop-ups focused on encouraging women to start businesses and providing best-in-class support to help them develop products and get early access to funding. Relaunching the Scottish Government's Ecosystem Fund with an explicit focus on supporting projects that address the report's key themes. Continuing funding for key partner organisations, including Women's Enterprise Scotland, Investing Women, Business Women Scotland and Scottish Edge. Working with enterprise agencies, the Scottish National Investment Bank and private sector investors to open up access to investment avenues for women-led businesses and other underinvested groups. The First Minister recently launched a 10-year plan to help create world-class entrepreneurial campuses at 45 universities and colleges across Scotland, with a £5.5 million increase in the 23-24 University Innovation Fund helping deliver the plan and support wider efforts to turn world-leading research into important innovations. The Wellbeing Economy and Fair Work Secretary said, "We have all of the raw ingredients necessary to match the leading European exemplars, a proud tradition of innovation and entrepreneurship, a university system that is the envy of the world, and exceptional capability in emerging industries such as clean energy, life sciences and artificial intelligence." This is a package of vision and aspiration that sends a clear and powerful message to Scotland's innovators, entrepreneurs and disruptors. This government believes in you and we are prepared to back you. So William, for me the big standout in that report is women, and how do we get more women? I'm sorry to all viewers that it's an all, forgive me William, but we're a white male stale old panel tonight, myself included. But so how do we get more women to become a player in the business sector?
Well, that's a difficult one, but I think some of the things the Scottish government are doing will help that. I think also get them young as well, and it's open to all. I was here when we reported on the entrepreneurship program in the universities on Tuesday night, and I think that's a very positive thing. Um, I think the Scottish government has always had um, the ambition to bring women on, and Nicola Sturgeon's first 50-50 cabinet way back in what was it, 2016, kind of reflected that. And as with everything where you're making a transformational change, and to encourage women to get involved in business more and to make a success of it would represent a transformational change, you just keep at it and work on it, and just treat everybody equally and with fairness. I think entrepreneurship is going to be the big thing in an independent Scotland that drives the economy forward, much as it did in Estonia, and particularly with younger people in Estonia way back when they became independent. And it's one of the things, this sort of attitude about encouraging innovation is one of the things that gives me hope that on top of the other economic good news we've had, we'll actually be okay, folks. When we become independent, this will work, and we'll make sure it does.
Thank you, William. And my first question to you, I think I maybe kind of got things the wrong way around. I was asked how do we get more women to become active in the business sector, but why do you think they haven't been active up until now? As,
Um, that's a very interesting one, and I suppose it's really not something I can give you a full answer on. But I do think probably the likeliest thing, as it has always been in terms of women being held back, is that um, entrenched attitudes need to be blown away, and that does take time. But what you need is a little bit of positive discrimination and a lot of determination. And I think really the Scottish Government has shown that over the last few years.
Thank you, William. And it's maybe just worth mentioning, it may be a white stale male picture that's facing the viewers tonight, but there's two women in the control room, so just give a heads up to them. Yeah, anyway, so we'll move on to the final item. From Saturday, changes to the way Scottish Fire and Rescue, that's the SFRS, response to fire alarm activations means those with fire safety responsibility on the premises, known as duty holders, will be required to investigate the cause of an alarm and only call 999 once a fire has been confirmed. SFRS say that this approach is already embedded across several other UK fire and rescue services, where requiring a confirmed fire before fire appliances are deployed has become standard practice. The change to the way SFRS respond to fire alarms will affect all premises and businesses who do not provide sleeping accommodation. Hospitals, care homes, hotels, student accommodation and domestic dwellings will continue to receive the current level of emergency response. Workplaces are being reminded to provide adequate training for staff on the new process and put in place fire safety provisions. Most signals from automatic fire alarm systems turn out not to be actual fires, but are false alarms, often caused by cooking fumes, dust, or a lack of maintenance of fire detection systems. However, until now, fire crews were required to attend unnecessarily. This change in response to unnecessary fire alarms is intended to allow operational fire crews to respond to real emergencies. The expected reduction in the number of call-outs is expected to reduce the risk caused by fire engines travelling at high speed on the roads and lower environmental emissions caused by unnecessary blue light journeys. Educational premises are typically one of the largest sources of unnecessary false alarms in non-sleeping premises. Last year, primary and secondary schools, as well as colleges and universities, registered more than 4,500 false alarm signals, accounting for 1 in every 6 incidents. Figures also show that businesses, including call centres, offices, pubs and restaurants, are also consistently attended by crews. Offices and call centres alone were subject to more than 2,500 UFAS calls in 2022. Shops and single retail units recorded more than 800 incidents, and pubs and bars registered more than 600. SFRS Director of Service Delivery, Assistant Chief Officer David Faries, said, "As we approach July, we need our business community and duty holders to ensure they are fully aware of the imminent changes to the way we will respond to unwanted fire alarm signals. We will continue to work with duty holders to help them better understand their obligations, but I must stress the importance of having adequate training in place for staff and ensuring appropriate fire safety provisions are in place within business premises." So, William, this is a huge change, isn't it, to how procedures have gone in the past. Do you think there's two things to balance, isn't there? I can understand why the fire brigade would want to not attend false alarms, because it means that they're in place when there is a real fire. But is there a risk to people losing their lives here?
Well, there shouldn't be a risk. Firstly, there was a public consultation on this, not that that says anything about the risks. And I don't think this is anything other than Scotland coming into line with the other fire services work within the UK. All we're saying, all they are saying, is that if an automatic fire alarm goes off in a place where there isn't somebody likely to be sleeping, so it will discount things like hotels and care homes and hospitals, etc. Automatic alarms will still be responded to there. But if they get an alarm from somewhere else, where it's quite likely the premises are empty anyway, they will contact them or contact the key holder to try and establish whether there is actually a problem. And of course, if there's a visible problem, visible to members of the public, it'll be phoned in anyway and won't be automatic. So it's a way of reasonably reliably cutting out the false alarms, which really does take up an awful lot of resource and potentially could endanger lives elsewhere. So I think it's pragmatic. I think there is a balance to be struck, but bearing in mind that other fire services do this, I think it's a perfectly sensible way to go about it. It'll be quite interesting to see, however, what the reaction is to it in the main media when it comes in, if they make anything of it, or if it just becomes just the norm, because I think it should. I think it's sensible, and well, we will see.
Yeah, I did a wee bit digging before we came on there, and certainly the figures are the figures in support of it are kind of quite impressive. Apparently, the Scottish Fire Service responded to 28,479 unwanted fire alarm signals in Scotland last year. I don't know if that figure was mentioned in the report. And I've got here a list of key benefits and key risks, which I'm just going to take a minute to read out. Key benefits: the Scottish Fire, the SFRS have identified as improved firefighter and community safety through the reduction of blue light journeys, improved availability of resources and more time to focus on upskilling and training and prevention work, reduced response costs. I don't think all of these were mentioned in the report, but we've got time now. Reduced fleet carbon emissions, reduced least risk of all options. Not sure what that means. Automatic response to AFAs where people are sleeping is a key benefit. Key risks include risk of building damage, a risk to building occupants, an increased risk to firefighter safety, fire and issue reputational damage, and retained volunteer retention and recruitment issues. But you think that on the whole, the balance is going to be a good thing. It didn't really mention the environment there either. The carbon footprint is one of the
Well,
things we want to reduce.
it kind of did hint at the environment, and where we are at the hub, we're not all that far from the power station in Perth. And certainly, when I'm sitting up in the cafe up the road doing all my fevered typing, when I get out of the actual hub and need to start doing the admin, I frequently see fire engines sort of go past on the Caledonian Road just across from where I'm sitting. And to think that maybe 1 in 6 of those calls is unnecessary because it's a response to an automatic alarm is a little bit shocking. And I think anything you can do to cut that down, with all the concomitant benefits that you listed, is a good thing. As ever, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating, but I think there are enough safeguards in there to make this work.
And just a couple of little anecdotes before we close up the show. I've always worked in the public sector, so I've quite often been involved in this kind of thing where an alarm goes off and the fire brigade have got to come out, but there is no fire, there is no risk to life. One place that I worked in, somebody was put something like a bun in a toaster and then left the room, and of course it didn't pop up and that produced smoke. That ended up setting off the fire alarms, and we had to empty the building completely, which was about something like a couple of hundred visitors to it was a museum that I used to work in, and everybody had to evacuate and wait to be let back in. And then in a previous role in a nursing home, I swear that there was one woman had realised that if she couldn't really mobilise, she couldn't weight bear, but she used to use a lot of hairspray, and if she found out that if she sprayed the hairspray at the smoke detector, that would set the alarm off, and the fire brigade would come out, and they would insist going right to the room. So I think she really just wanted to see some firemen before she went to bed on a Friday night, because I used to work night shifts.
Because nursing homes will be exempt from this. The automatic alarms will still be responded to.
Yeah, that's a good
So
point.
it'll still work for her.
So she'll still get the firemen in. But so we're in luxury now of having a couple of minutes. So is there anything this evening that you were maybe hoping to get across, but I didn't give you time for in the previous item?
Oh no, I was taking all the time I possibly could. Don't worry. If I'm getting my meal pale and stale chance to talk about stuff, I'll talk to the cows come home.
I'm so sorry about that, but you see what I was getting at when I was saying that. So I'll probably never get to and ask you any questions again on tonight's show because of that. But anyway, thank you again, William, for giving us your time and your insights. It's much appreciated.
Thank you. Yes, good to be on.
Especially at such short notice. Thank you. So that's it for this evening, but before I go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. You know that our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 per month, please do consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us to employ staff and make more programmes like this one. So, good night and thank you for watching. Oh, and yes, forgive me, but the voice in my ear has just reminded me. Please check out our new Amazon app, and we've got, you can see in the screen there, a QR code, which I think if you pause the show and scan it on your mobile phone, that'll take you to the new app where you can access our programmes there. So the Amazon Fire, I'm told, whatever that may be, I have no idea. So thank you, and I'll let you get on with your evening. Good night.